She needs a date to her best friend's gala. He wants to settle down. Can they get past their hang-ups to see that they should be together? This is the premise of The Accidental Swipe by me, Y.M. Nelson. This steamy contemporary romance features Jason and Fortune, two people who've given up on love and are urged to use an online dating app to find someone. When they find each other, the attraction is undeniable, but their jaded outlooks on love based on past emotional hurt may keep them from getting together. The Accidental Swipe releases on July 25th, 2023. Go to ymnelson.com for all of the latest details. This is the Nerdy Romantics Podcast, and I'm your host, Y.M. Nelson. Hello, Nerdy Romantics. Today we are talking Superman and Lois, and Superman and Lois actually airs on the CW network. Season 2 has completed. Season 3 will be out in March of 2023. And with me today, we have Perry and Jen as our guests today. And Perry, you're new to our audience, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on to talk about this today. But yeah, my name is Perry Constantine. I'm an author, an artist, a podcaster. My podcast is called Superhero Cinephiles, which, Yvonne, we've had you on before, and we talked about romance and superhero stories, which kind of led to this, because I was talking up this show in your appearance on my show, and then that kind of led to us doing this episode on your show. I'm also an author. I've been writing since about 2007. Mostly I do urban fantasy these days. I'm the author of the Luther Cross series and the Dark Crossroads universe that spins out of. And I've also written a bunch of other books in various genres, like mystery, superheroes, appropriately. And I am doing some comic book work as well. And that's about it for me. I'm just a nerdy guy, and I'm really looking forward to talking Superman with you guys.
Sounds great, Perry. Thank you for coming on. Jen, since it's a new year, why don't you reintroduce yourself to the audience and maybe some of our new members who are out there?
Sure. I am Jen Graybeal. I am an author, coach, and freelance editor. For the last 8 years, I have been working with romance authors and helping them with their books, business, and mindset. I met Yvonne and immediately was super excited to chat with her about all things nerdy, all things romance, all things nerdy romantic. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm excited to have you here. So before we get too far into our discussion of Superman and Lois, seasons 1 and 2, I want to remind everybody out there that, as usual, there will be spoilers of both season 1 and season 2. So if you have not seen Superman and Lois, now's the time to turn this off, go and watch it. You will love it, trust me. And then come back and listen to our discussion. Okay, so first off, usually what we do, Perry, is we just kind of give general impressions, what we thought about the show, maybe even some about how we found the show. Everybody knows how I found the show now because Perry talked to me about it on his podcast. And I fell into it and loved it. I watched it on HBO Max. So if you are trying to catch up, both season 1 and 2 are on HBO Max. I think that when season 3 comes out, if you have the CW streaming app, you can see it on the CW streaming app. I think it's usually a day after it airs, or and they have each episode up for like a week or a few weeks or something like that. But the CW streaming app is free. And you also have, of course, you can watch it live on the CW. Not sure what day that's on, but that may change anyway. So, Perry, how did you find out about Superman and Lois, this show, or just your first impressions and general thoughts?
So I'm a big comic book fan, and especially a big Superman fan. And I was really disappointed with the Zack Snyder movies. So when they announced they were having Superman on Supergirl, I got really excited. And when Tyler Hoechlin first appeared on that show, I thought he nailed it right out of the gate. And right from his first appearance in Supergirl, I'm like, they got to give this guy his own show. They got to give him his own show. I was a little bit less impressed with Elizabeth Tulloch when she first appeared. Not anything against her, just she just didn't really have anything stand out in her first appearances on the CW shows. And then finally they announced this show, and I was so psyched. Like, I pretty much avoid the CW app. Most of the CW DC shows, I usually wait until they come out on Netflix or HBO Max, and I just binge them. But that first season of Superman and Lois, I was so excited that I put up with all the bugs and problems with the CW app just so I could watch it the day after release every single week. And I love it. I completely fell in love with it. And some things that really surprised me, like I was not expecting to get as attached to their sons, Jordan and Jonathan, as I did.
Right.
And Bitsy Tulloch, man, she just knocked it out of the park. Like, she is now my favorite interpretation of Lois Lane. Like, she's just amazing in that.
She is.
Yeah, and Hoechlin continues to impress me, and we can probably dive into it deeper when we're talking about their different characters. But I love how he's like the ultimate dorky dad when he's in his Clark Kent persona, and I just love that about him. And yeah, just like all these characters from the Superman mythos that they've been bringing in and finding ways to work them in. I'm a big Steel fan, John Henry Irons. So I was so excited when it turned out that big reveal came and we found out he was actually Steel. I was so pumped for that. So yeah, I love it. I mean, I had some quibbles with season 2 as far as, hitting some of the same story beats over the course of the season. But overall, I think it's just a great show, and I am so excited for season 3.
Right. I agree with you on definitely on the Lois Lane aspect. I was like, oh wow. She's the best iteration of Lois Lane so far for me. I really like it. And I thought I was gonna be upset with the whole, oh my gosh, they have kids and the kids are teenagers kind of thing. But I wasn't. So yeah, we will definitely deep dive into characters. But Jen, how about you? How did you? Well, I think part of it was me saying, "Hey, do you want to talk about Superman and Lois?" But but tell me kind of what were your first impressions and your thoughts, and if I was really the first person to say something about this show to you.
You are the reason I went back to it. So I had started watching it on CW when it was a CW show, and we still had like cable channels. And but then we got rid of the cable channels and a lot of other stuff was going on. So I just never went back to it. And now we just use the streaming services. And I'm with Perry, not super impressed with the CW streaming app. So didn't really, and there's so many other things to watch. So it sort of fell off the list. So when you said something about it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that show. I'm going to go back and see it. And because before I'd watched maybe 3-4 episodes. And so I got back into it. We had subscribed to HBO Max in order to watch the Zack Snyder Justice League stuff.
Oh my God. So are we about to have a Justice League talk here in a second?
You do not want me going off for another few hours.
Yeah, we need hours for that one. We got
Yeah.
hours for that one, Yvonne, but I'm in
Yeah.
if you ever want to talk about it. But
Okay.
as far as this show, we stay on topic. Okay.
Got it.
But yeah, so I came back to it and just started watching it and making my way through it because I'm a big fan of Superman, but I was a much bigger fan of Lois Lane, I'll be honest with you, because I loved seeing strong women on the screen. And she was one of those folks that was kind of just a take no prisoners, take no bull kind of a person. She was super brave and always searching for the truth. And that was something that I just found really, really admirable and a wonderful role model to have in a lot of ways. So with this iteration, I was worried because not only did they give them kids, but they moved them to Smallville. And I'm like, you're going to take my person of Lois Lane, this, strong, hard charging, person, and you're going to make her a housewife. I'm not sure how into this I really am. And
boy.
I really appreciate that they kept her spine intact, if you will. Because I was a little concerned that they were going to go a different way with it. I did see.
Right.
I was a big fan of Supergirl. That's a show that I've watched all of, and that's another. It's not airing anymore, so I don't know if you want to talk about it, but I've got all kinds of episode ideas for you, Yvonne.
It might be a premium episode. Actually, I have thoughts, but yes.
Yeah. So watching them do the crossover episodes, I watched all the DC shows when they were on CW. So I loved the crossover episodes. I love seeing characters interact and go somewhere different. So I was also super impressed with the guy. What's his name? Tyler.
Tyler Hoechlin.
Hoechlin that is playing Superman. I thought, yep, this guy looks right. This guy looks like he could take it on, and they've done some great stuff with it. So I'm pretty happy. I've been really happy watching the show. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to reiterate that. Yeah, I like Tyler as Superman as well, and no, I'm not gonna digress into the whole Zack Snyder thing, but even though I love Henry Cavill, I'm gonna probably be in the minority for saying this. Please don't hate me, but I think Tyler is a better Superman.
I am right there with you.
Okay.
I mean, like, I feel so bad for Cavill though. I think that guy too. Got so robbed. Like
he totally did. I totally agree with you on that.
Like I'm a huge Superman fan from the comics, and I thought in the theatrical cut of Justice League, for all its problems, the one thing I thought it did better was Henry Cavill actually got a chance to be a little bit charming as Superman. I'm like, yes, that's how he's supposed to be. So seeing those brief flashes and then having it taken away was just so disappointing, because you hear him in interviews and it's so obvious that he wanted to play like this more hopeful version of Superman. And so seeing Tyler do it, like he's just knocking it out of the park. He is so nailing it.
Yes.
And honestly, I would go so far to say this is probably one of my favorite interpretations of Superman. I mean, Christopher Reeve is amazing, but he's more like the public image of Superman, right? He's like the upstanding moral guy. But in terms of Superman as a character, I think Tyler Hoechlin did such a good job with the, he gets the Superman aspect, but also as Clark Kent, right? He's an actual character. Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent, it was a different time. It was a different interpretation they were basing it off of, but he was, kind of a cartoon character. And I think, seeing Tyler Hoechlin playing Clark as a dad it's so perfect for Superman. And this is something that they've done in the comics beginning about within the past like 10 years or so, when they introduced his son in the comic books too. And
I was gonna ask that. So does he have twins in the comic, or is it just one son, or how is that working?
It's just one son in the comics. These comics came out before Superman and Lois. So a few years back, they introduced the son Jonathan. They introduced him as a little kid, and then he went up into space and went on some time travel adventures, and now he's like a university age student. So
Okay.
comic books.
Right. They can do
and
that.
he's his own Superman too. He's got his own title and everything. And I just read one of the first books that he's in, and it's really good. There's also this big internet controversy, I'll say, ridiculous, because it was ridiculous, but they revealed that he's bisexual. And so you're getting a lot more representation with him in the comics as well. And he's a great character in the comic books. Very different from Jonathan on the TV show, but it's a very cool story.
Oh, neat. Okay. And I like the representation part. I like the fact that that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's get into, since we're already talking, Tyler as Superman and just the whole Superman and Lois and the whole love story and how that comes together, and then how Lana fits into the picture. And of course, Perry, I want to ask questions about the comics, because I guess I probably should start off by saying, first episode of the first season, you get the whole story of Superman and Lois and their love story all the way up until they have the teenage kids, right? Or until they have the kids and then they become teenagers. So you're caught up in the whole first episode. So actually this part is not really spoiler, but also in the first episode, as Jen said, we're going back to Smallville. And I don't remember if this is in the first or the second episode, but it's also very early on that we meet Lana from Smallville. And I don't know if anybody remembers that show Smallville, although this is not the same actress that played Lana then, but it was kind of like an Easter egg to me, or like a kind of a throwback. And I was wondering, I was like, are they going to redo, because isn't Smallville a WB kind of CW kind of I don't know.
Yeah, it started off on the WB, and then it was one of the shows that made the jump to the transition. I think Supernatural was another one that made that transition when they made it when they combined with UPN and became the CW. But yeah, that show was on the air for 10 years. There have been some references here and there to show that, and they do this a lot with the CW shows, where they'll pick different aspects of things in the past to kind of reference. Supergirl had an episode like that where they referenced the fact that Superman and Lex Luthor used to be friends. They also made mention of Chloe, who was a Smallville character at one point. But all these kind of shows, they kind of have like similar origin stories, like similar,
right? They're all in the same universe, or it's sort of
kind of, yeah.
Not comic book universe, I mean literary universe or artistic universe.
Yeah,
not comic book universe. That's right.
They're basically, they're in the multiverse, it's called, where they're different versions, and so like there's lots of similarities across these different versions. So like, even though Tyler Hoechlin and Bitsy Tulloch appeared in the other CWDC shows, we find out in season 2 of Superman and Lois that this is actually a different universe from those other shows. So because Sam makes mention of the fact that there are other superheroes in other universes that Superman has encountered, but he is the only superhero on our Earth.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's a lot of crossover, even without the word crossover, and even without the actual crossover, which is actually, that's the first time I actually saw Superman and Lois, these actors playing these characters, was in the Crisis of Infinite Earths, that crossover. And I was actually watching it. I was really trying to catch up with the Flash. I'm with both of you on the fact that having these on Netflix is so much better than the CW app, unless you just like, I have to watch it now. But if you don't, if you're the I can wait, and binge it later, Netflix is the place to binge this, except for Superman and Lois, which is on HBO Max. That's how I found it.
Batwoman 2 is also on HBO Max.
Yes, because it was so interesting how that ended up on these two shows ended up on HBO Max, but the rest of the shows are on Netflix. So I guess that's a money production thing.
No, I think it has to do with the deals that Netflix had with Warner Brothers. So before, Netflix had day after airing deal with Warner Brothers, where the CW shows would end up on Netflix like the day after the season finale airs, or something like that, or like a week after, very, very soon after. And then they'd put the whole seasons on Netflix. But when HBO Max came into the picture, then they started going back and redoing some of their deals. So like The Flash, Arrow, Supergirl, Black Lightning, all those still had were still part of that Netflix deal.
Netflix, yeah.
But Superman and Lois and Batwoman were not part of that original deal. So now those became straight to HBO Max as a result.
That's how that worked out. Kind of like on the Marvel side, how they had that in the beginning with the Netflix shows that were on Marvel, and then how they moved those all around. It's all a deal.
Yeah.
It's all about a deal. But getting back to the show and getting back to kind of the central characters, Superman / Clark Kent and Lois. When I saw that they were going to be back in Smallville, and then they had Lana come, she's in the picture, but she has a whole family. So don't worry about that. But at one point I was like, oh gosh, please don't pit these women against each other, because Jen, I'm with you with having Lois be a strong woman, and I didn't want her to be a strong woman and against another woman.
Exactly. I did not want to see this set up as some sort of weird like triangle, because one, I don't particularly like love triangles in any way, but more importantly, it doesn't feel authentic to Superman and Clark Kent.
Right.
That he would be like caught between and even wondering what it is where his feelings lie. So I didn't feel like that would be a good way for them to go. So I was really happy to see them showing up as friends and showing up as look, you can be friends with people and keep it real. So we'll see.
Yeah. Jen, I'm gonna start with you though. What did you think about the whole Superman is now married to Lois and they have kids? The whole relationship dynamic and family dynamic. Is that a shock to you? Is that how did you feel about it?
Yeah. This is one of those things, it makes me nervous. When we see favorite characters being put into new situations, because one of the things that a lot of shows struggle with is taking that dynamic and introducing it in a new way and coming up with realistic ways of conflict that are not always have to be like marital trouble. That always seems to be where they go with a lot of these characters is marital trouble. And given the history of Lois and Clark and the entity of Superman that is a part of their relationship and has been from the beginning, that's one of those things, when you see Clark having to run off literally to go save a town or save I hear something and he sort of like makes a look. And what I appreciated is that they took some of those healthy relationship dynamics and applied them to this whole I'm gonna have to go. And it's like, okay, we'll have be careful out there and I'll see you later, honey, and make it just a completely normal part of their lives. I understand I appreciate the fact that they had kept all of this from their sons, but I also thought that it was really great that the sons were mad about it when they did finally say, okay, have a seat. Here's the secret we've been keeping from you all this time. And I thought that was, the kids are 15, and one of the things I appreciate about 15-year-olds is that they can be angry about absolutely anything and have no perspective
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
world, and it's very consistent for 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
um so I appreciate that about them, for them to just kind of treat that with anger and not with, oh, this is cool or whatever. So all those times that he has, and I also like the idea that they were a little angry about the many times that dad would just like leave them and not be there when he said he was going to be there, and always had an excuse or what have you, and that ability to just kind of be angry at a parent for doing that, even though he's, later you find out he's off saving the world and you're like, oh, man, I don't think I'm supposed to be mad about that, but dang it, it was, it was something I wanted him to be there, and he missed out or what have you. So
Mhm.
I do appreciate that they're really trying to incorporate a lot of very realistic family dynamics into a family relationship that's very odd.
Right.
Not all of us
Exactly.
have superhero parents, so
Right, right. No, no. Even though sometimes they seem like they are.
yeah, yeah.
Or they have their
Um,
moments, their
yeah, exactly how
superhero
much that
moments.
is interrupting everybody's life is that's big news, and that is, and I think the kids are justified in their anger, but I think that they kind of come around and accept it, and the way that that plays out over the course of the season, of oh, you're out doing all these big things, and now I can worry about you in a different way. And that's another thing about teenagers that I feel like is really realistic, because they start kind of feeling like, oh, as an adult, here I am, an adult at 15. As an adult, I should help, or I should step in, or I should fix it. And so again, I felt like that was a good way for them to go, and how they change up that relationship. And we haven't seen Superman as a dad in a lot of the previous media iterations, in terms of the movies and stuff. He's been in the comic books, obviously, but not in a lot of the movies. And I feel like they went the right direction with it. I love a dorky dad. Man, I love a dorky dad who is so earnest and trying to say the right thing, and then the kids roll their eyes anyway. Man, I love it.
Right.
That's my future right there. So
Uh-huh.
my
All
kids
right,
are my
Perry.
oldest is 2, but I'm looking at everything that's happening now, and I'm like, oh man, I love this. I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
that's my future. I'm looking at right there.
it is. My kids are in their 20s. I'm proud to say I have survived. I've survived 2 teenagers in my house, teenage girls. And yeah, the power of an eye roll from across the room. Oh man.
It's no joke. I'm with you on the whole realism, Jen, of it. The real family dynamics with superpowers added. Like
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
if one parent had superpowers, actual superpowers, this is probably what a real family would look like, kind of thing. I love that that is going on. And Perry and I kind of talked about that a little bit as far as the real dynamic on our episode, which I will link in the show note, nerdyromanticspodcast.com. They will be in the show notes. I will link that episode because we won't rehash it here. The one thing that, Jen, that you mentioned is the teenagers, as they realize, okay, they're adults, and now the wool has been pulled over their eyes, so now they have to help, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is expounded when we realize that Jordan has powers, and instead of wanting to kind of go at exploring his powers at a slower pace, and trying to understand that whole dynamic, he's like, I just want to figure this all out, and dad, just let me do this, and I still want to go to school, and I still want to do all this stuff, and stop hiding me away. And I mean, he just wanted to go at everything full force.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very teenagery too. It's like, this is not how things are supposed to go. Also we see, in this first season, because we are seeing that dynamic of now Jordan has powers, we're seeing a lot of the Fortress of Solitude, which Easter egg, and coach, comic book Easter egg, movie Easter egg. We're seeing that for the first time. And, I was like, oh my gosh, cool. So I had a geek out moment for that. But, along with the whole geek out moments that we have, I don't want to necessarily stray from this as we are talking realism and family dynamics. They're also, because they've moved back to Smallville, which is in Kansas, there's also a societal and a cultural, there's societal and cultural things going on in Kansas. And one of the big things, and Jen, this is kind of, it made me think about you when they mentioned it, was as we talked about, there's Lana, and Lana has a whole family, right? She's got a husband, she's got 2 girls. One of the girls is a teenager. And, same mindset, I want to be, my own person. I want to be an adult. And in that, with that, and with all the other stuff going on, there's a moment where, and I think this is more realized in season 2 than season 1, but in season 2, and this is what made me think of you, Jan, is she says, we have this Mexican heritage, and we've been hiding this Mexican heritage because their last name is Cushing, I think. But their actual familial last name, is it Cortez or is it something else?
I think it was Cortez. I'm not 100% certain, but that's ringing a bell. So I think that's what it was.
Right. And so then they had kind of a half episode. They explained in an episode that it might have been the quinceañera episode, where they talk about the rich Mexican culture in the Midwest. And the reason why this made me think of you, Jen, is because we had just done a podcast episode, and you talked about After Hours on Milagro Street by Angelina Lopez.
Absolutely.
And that, even though it's a contemporary romance, she does a lot of, because the hero is, a history professor, we can go into a lot of depth. And 2, she, and because she's Mexican, the heroine, we go into a lot of detail of Mexican immigrants in the Midwest and the generations of Mexican heritage and how that is wiped out of a lot of media.
We don't, whenever you see Kansas, you think of people that are very pale, and that's not the reality. And that in that book, and actually the author's heritage is that she is from the Midwest, and her family's been there 150 years. So there's a lot more depth in our I think in our society than sometimes we give credit for. And I really appreciate when the media sometimes they get accused of being woke or something like that, which is just the stupidest thing in the world, because what they're actually doing is being more accurate and more realistic. Exactly. And showing life the way it actually is or was. So I really appreciated that they were bringing that in, and that there was a little bit of conflict there amongst the family members, and what they wanted how they wanted to celebrate their culture and their history that they had kind of pushed to the side a bit for a long time. So in season 2, I thought that was really nicely done.
Yeah. I totally agree. Between both seasons, we see that whole teenager kind of angst and that whole level going on.
Yeah.
And you know what? That actually, to me, I don't know if it does for either of you, but to me, it brings kind of another level to the show where the show can grow even more than just showing this round character of Superman / Clark Kent and all, because there is the tendency to want to kind of focus on the title characters, right? But the title characters are at this point where stuff has been realized that, like in the movies, this is part of the plot. This is the discovering, or in the different shows that we've seen, these characters on. That's kind of part of the plot and part of the evolution of the show or the movie. But here they're kind of at this, for those of us who are not necessarily, in comic book land, this is kind of, I don't want to say this is the end point, but this is kind of the pinnacle point. Like everything that we knew about Superman and Lois, they went through it in the first episode for us.
Right.
So it's like, where are we gonna go with these characters now? But I think, yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna jump in. I was just gonna say that one of the things that has annoyed a lot of comic book fans with a lot of movies in recent years has been the tendency to overdo the origin story. I mean, like, how many times do we have to see Uncle Ben get shot? How many times do we have to see Martha Wayne's pearls falling in slow motion? How many times do we have to see Krypton exploding? I mean, my grandmother has never picked up a comic book in her life, but even she knows Superman's origin story. We don't have to constantly be retreading it. And I think this show has done something really smart in that it's respecting the audience's intelligence. It's like, okay, we know the story of how Superman got to Earth. We know the story of how Clark Kent became Superman. We did 10 years of it on Smallville, so we know how that all worked. And we know that about Lois and Clark and all that. So we're going to fast forward 15 years and drop you in the middle of that. And I think that was a very smart way to do things.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Jen, tell me what you think about it.
Oh, no, I'm just absolutely agreeing with Perry, because we've had so many iterations of Lois and Clark. Well, there was a show called Lois and Clark. But so many iterations of them sort of, bad guy of the week type of shows where, somebody was going to come and do bad things in Metropolis. So by taking those extremely familiar characters of all the superheroes that they could pick from, Superman is probably the one that is most familiar. Superman, maybe Spider-Man, but Superman has such a long history of being depicted in cartoon form, in movie form, in television form, and all these other things. So there's so many different ways that we've already seen these characters together. So when you're trying to bring something new, because that was another thing I was concerned. I was like, well, is this going to be like, okay, well, they've given them kids. Are they just, plot Muppets? Is that what they are? They're just sort of there for a funny line now and again, but they've really taken that and made them into really interesting characters on their own, and made them, multidimensional on their own in relationship to, and in relationship to who their dad is. Like I said before, I love a dorky dad. Absolutely love a dorky dad. And the fact that they would be able to utilize the kids in that way, and sort of show these other layers of Clark and of Lois, I think is bringing this great dimension. I feel like, Perry, you were trying to say something. I'm interrupted.
Sorry, no, it's not your fault. My daughter was screaming, so so I had to jump out for a second. So thanks for picking it up. One of the things I think too, and I might be backtracking a little bit here, so apologies to the listeners if I am. I got two kids who are just waking up now. It's early morning here in Japan. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the characters that they're doing here is that, like you were saying, they're showing all these different layers of it. I mean, we can kind of picture Superman as a dad, right? Because he's like the ultimate dad superhero to begin with, right? He's always kind of like the patriarchal figure of the DC universe, of comic books in general, right? Of superheroes in general, because he's like the first. But Lois Lane as a mom is something that we haven't really seen before, and she's not the typical image you think of when you think of like a TV mom or anything like that. And I think that showing this other side of her and what happens when you take this, take no crap reporter who is always like putting herself into risky situations and who is willing to sacrifice everything for a story. What happens when you put her in the role of being a mom to two teenage sons? And I think that's been really interesting to watch her deal with that. And another thing this show has done is and again, this is backtracking, but you guys were talking about Lana before and how you were glad that they didn't go the stereotypical route of having a love triangle. And I agree. And there are so many times in this show when it seems like they're going to go that stereotypical route, when it seems like they're going to, he's back in Smallville, Lana's here, she's having troubles with her husband, maybe there's going to be some love triangle thing, and then they swerve, and then instead, oh no, Lana and Lois become best friends. And or like even with Jordan and Jonathan, right? Oh, they're two teenage boys, there's one girl, she's friends with both of them, and it looks like her and Jonathan are getting close. Oh, no, they're not getting involved. We're not going down that route. Every time they start to set up those stereotypical things that you'd expect from a drama series like this, they curve and they don't go that route. And Yvonne, I think one of the things I sold you on this show was one of my favorite scenes in the first season and this is really kind of indicative of how mature the relationship dynamics are in this series, is when Lois asks Clark to go to cover the town hall meeting because she's got to go on investigate something else. So she asks him to go and take notes and everything and be her representative there. And he says, yeah, I'll do it. Absolutely. And then what happens is something happens. Something comes up because he's Superman. Something always comes up and he has to go take care of it. And the typical thing you'd see in that situation is when they interact again, Lois would be pissed off at him. And almost irrationally so. But what they do here is they handle it very smartly because Lois says, look, I know you're Superman. I know you were saving lives. I understand that. Logically, I understand all that. But emotionally, I'm still upset, so I just need a minute. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to handle that situation.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
And you did sell me on it right then and there because of that kind of realism and because of the layers. They're just innate layers that happen when they do these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Right. And you show like a little bit more of these characters. And of course, as a watcher, we're hooked in, but also we are hooked in because we are nerds and we like Easter eggs. So let's talk Easter eggs, y'all. For me, I think one of the biggest ones we might have already, which we already said, was the fact that we saw the Fortress of Solitude. Also, the fact as the seasons go on, we meet these characters that we recognize from either comic book or from other shows or other movies. Perry, you mentioned Steel. When Tal-Rho first came on the scene, well, Tal-Rho was Morgan Edge, and I didn't really know. I was like, he's gonna be a bad guy, but he looks like, But when Tal-Rho came on the scene, I was like, a little bit giddy about that. But I was mostly giddy about the whole Bizarro thing. But Perry, you're saying Bizarro is not exactly like that in the comics?
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh. But you're saying it's not.
Yeah, so in the comic books, there are different versions of Bizarro, and the earlier versions of Bizarro were from the Bizarro world. So it's like our world, but everything is backwards. And instead of it being a round planet, it's a square planet. And just like in that, instead of saying hello, they say goodbye. Instead of saying good, they say bad. Everything is the reverse. That was the original Bizarro. In the more modern tellings, Bizarro is actually an imperfect clone of Superman. And it's just like, the cloning process didn't work right. And so there are these different versions. But in all versions, pretty much consistently, Bizarro is not really intelligent. He can't really speak properly. He doesn't idiot. Really understand. Yeah. To be a little bit more blunt. Yeah, exactly. But in this one, they did an interesting thing where they showed the Bizarro Superman is actually being kind of intelligent on his own. And I thought that was an interesting take. But even still, the way they introduced him, and this is something this show does a lot, is they have a little bit of a bait and switch with some of the villains. So Morgan Edge is his own villain in the comic books. He's not a Kryptonian. In fact, for people who watch Supergirl, you may remember that in, I think it was either season 1 or season 2, they had Morgan Edge in there, although it was a different actor, different character. Another example was when John Henry was introduced, right? They were calling him Captain Luthor. So we were all thinking he's Lex Luthor from a different universe, right?
Right.
He's
that
bald.
was immediately what I thought. And I said, please don't do this. Of course, as a person of color, he was the first person of color that we knew was a person of color on this show, because we didn't realize that Lana's husband and everything, they had Mexican heritage. But but yes, having him as that, and then his motive at the time was to kill Superman. When I first saw that, I was mad. I was mad. And so I was like, I hope this doesn't go that way. But then when we see the evolution of the character and Steel, which I must confess, I don't really know. I don't really have background on. And for those of us, for those of you in the audience who may not have as much background, Perry, tell us a little bit about that character.
Sure. So first off, if you're looking for information on Steel, and you might stumble across on HBO or somewhere else a movie that came out in 1997 starring Shaquille O'Neal.
Yes.
This is based on the comic book character Steel. This is based on the same guy. And your temptation would be to watch that movie. You should ignore that temptation. This movie is absolutely awful. In fact, one of my favorite episodes of my show we did was when we covered Steel. And it was a terrible movie, but we had a lot of fun just ripping it apart. And that's pretty much the only benefit that the movie has. Now, Steel in the comic books is a really awesome character. He's one of the greatest characters that's been created at DC, and and he came out about 30 years ago or so, when DC did this big storyline called The Death of Superman. And so they introduced this character Doomsday, which is also kind of how the way Bizarro first appears in that suit and everything and punching through the mountains. That's very similar to how Doomsday appeared in the comic book. So they'd done a bait and switch where everybody thought, oh, we're getting Doomsday in this. And then it turns out to be Bizarro instead.
Oh, wow.
So that was a little bit of a bait and switch the show did. Anyway, in the comic books, Superman fights Doomsday. He gets killed. And then shortly after his death, there are 4 different Supermen who appear. One of them is Superboy, who is a young clone of Superman. In fact, the Bizarro Jonathan is wearing basically the classic Superboy costume from that series. So like with the red pants and the leather jackets, that's how Superboy dressed early in his appearances in the comics.
In the comics, okay.
Yeah. So that was that you're talking Easter eggs. That was one of those Easter eggs. And then there were also 2 other characters. One of them was like a cyborg version of Superman who was actually lying about who he was. Another one was the Eradicator. That's another Easter egg that the show tosses in, the Eradicator system and all that. That was its own character in the comics. He was like this Kryptonian artificial intelligence that was designed to defend Kryptonian heritage. So he appears in that. And then also they had this guy, Steel. His name was John Henry Irons, and he was a former weapons developer for the U.S. military. And then he didn't like what the military was doing with his weapons, so he quit. And then he was kind of like, dishonorably discharged or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but he ended up working construction. And he's working on a high rise and he falls and he gets saved by Superman. So after Superman dies, he takes it upon himself to defend Metropolis. So he builds this suit of armor and he starts calling himself the Man of Steel and goes out and continues on Superman's legacy. And so he's a great example of, you're talking about characters of color, right? He's a super intelligent guy. He's basically like the DC Universe's version of Iron Man, only he's not a rich asshole.
Right. Yeah. When that character started to evolve, that's kind of what I was like, okay, I feel a lot better now, because yes, at first I was mad because I was like, because they were calling him Mr. Luthor, and I was like, Oh my gosh, is he going to be like another a Lex Luthor from a multiverse, and this is from another universe, and he's going to be bad? And I was getting very angry at that. But I'm glad that didn't happen. And I'm sorry, I kind of got you off track because you were talking about, him being introduced as Lex Luthor, but you were on a different track, and we were talking Easter eggs. You were on a different track. Was there something else you wanted to say in that vein, or did I just
No,
totally...
I had kind of incorporated in my answer the idea of the whole bait and switch aspect. So they did it with Luthor, and it turns out it's actually Steel. They did it with Morgan Edge to an extent, where he's not really Morgan Edge, he's actually Tal-Rho, he's Kryptonian. And they did it in season 2 twice, right? They had it with, or not really twice, but they had it with, it looks like Doomsday at first, but it's actually Bizarro. And then they have Allie Alston is an interesting character too, because she does appear in the comics, but what she was she was a character. She was one of the characters who takes on the name of the Parasite, who like kind of drains energy from other people. And there's talking Easter eggs. There's a little reference when Lois calls Allie a parasite. That's referencing who she was in the comics.
Okay. Did not know that. That's very interesting. Jen, what about you? What Easter eggs kind of stood out to you?
Okay. So I'm not very good at pulling the Easter eggs, I have to say.
Or should I say, what made you giddy when you saw it? That's when I say Easter, it's the Easter egg, because it made me giddy when I saw it. And I'm like, I know what this is about. The whole Bizarro character, I was like, I know what this is
about. Okay, that I was excited about because, like I said, I don't read the comics, and so, but I know who Bizarro is. And so when they finally like slowed down enough to see, because and first you get like just a little chunk of his face, and then later on we see him as in the suit, so that made me very happy. And I also really appreciated oh shoot, I just lost my thought. I'm not fantastic at the Easter eggs, I have to say, but I do really love that what Perry was talking about with the bait and switch, where you think they're going to go one direction with a storyline, and then they send you in another direction. Yeah. The number of times they do that in each season, even in some of the episodes, is so fantastic. And it's honestly, it's one of the things that like really has kept me watching this show. They, we talked before about having this depth of character. Each person that is highlighted really has their whole own, internal story that they're dealing with, and their wants and needs and all that kind of great stuff. But the way that they're able to sort of weave all that stuff together has really been done extremely well. There's a lot of story that happens in each episode. And so that's what gets me giddy. At the end of the day, I love seeing how the episodes and storylines sort of are distinct and separate, and the way that they come together. That's where I nerd out. Yeah, I will have to agree with you there. It's the depth of story is amazing here, and the fact that even though it's sort of episodic, it sort of isn't as well. So it's like, I think if I probably wouldn't watch this in real time. I think I would still wait until the whole season came out and then watch the whole season. But there is like, it's not as episodic as something like The Flash is. Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's true. The Flash is still is a show that has a bad guy of the week, and this has like the overarching story that continues on through each episode. Right.
In fact, I think this show has done something really, really smart with the way it constructs its seasons, because there are pros and cons to the two main approaches, right? You either have like the episodic one with some big bad in the background, or you have, kind of like the binge watching model, which a lot of like Netflix does and stuff like that, where it's basically one long story divided up into 6 or 10 or 12 or episodes or whatever have you. But I think what this has managed to do is it finds this nice middle ground between those two, where it's not quite completely episodic, but it's also not the binge model where you kind of have that soggy middle where it's just like, okay, you guys are just killing time now.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. That's exactly what I was gonna say. It's like, it's in that happy medium of I could be satisfied if I stop watching at episode 3, because there's so many layers and there's so much story in each episode that if I only watch a couple of episodes, and this is exactly what happened. I mean, well, I would say even with, unless it's something like Stranger Things or something, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a weekend and I'm just going to watch this whole thing. I love those shows that even though they're bingeable, I can watch like a couple of episodes, maybe after work to calm down or, get into that whole evening mood or whatever. And I can be satisfied with that. And that is what this show does. It has so much satisfying story in each episode that I'm good with a couple of episodes until I need a couple more.
That's exactly how I watched season 2, actually. Like season 1, I watched it day after on the CW app, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was so tired of all the bugginess with the app, all the repeating ads. And so when season 2 came out, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to wait until it all comes out on HBO Max. And I did exactly what you said. Like I'd watch I'd watch like 3 episodes one day. I'd watch like 5 episodes another day. Then I'd watch like maybe 2 episodes or 1. And I spread it out over the course of about a week or so. It was a really nice way to consume it. It never felt like I never felt like, oh, I have to watch the next one right now. But I'm just like, I'm satisfied with what I just watched. I can wait to the next day to watch like the next batch of episodes.
Right, exactly. Which, I hate to say it because there's so much story and there's so many other things that I want to talk about. Kind of feels like we want to talk about in general, like what our rating is for this show. Do either of you have something that we didn't cover that you wanted to really talk about?
There's some things I think, and you guys may have touched on some of this stuff. Like I really liked the portrayal of Lana Lang in general. Like I think, we were talking about how this is probably one of the best versions of Lois we've ever seen. I think this is definitely the best version of Lana we've ever seen. She's such a well-rounded character in her own right. And I love this idea of her having so much power and so much influence in this town, because you had Smallville, the TV show, where she was a big part of it, but she was basically the early 2000s teenage love interest, right? And so didn't have a whole lot of character defining moments in that show. She was basically there to be cute for the audience and to like, kind of woo the main character, and then to get kidnapped and then conveniently, get knocked unconscious whenever Clark was going to use his superpowers. Right. And that happened like every single episode early on. But here they've done, and even in the comic books, like she's been written as, in the old comics, like she was Lois Lane's rival for Superman's affection, right? So they're always just kind of like this whole like catty back and forth thing between them. She hasn't really appeared in a lot of media outside of Smallville, and even in the later comics, in the more recent ones, like when they brought her back in the 1980s, she was kind of like stalking Clark Kent, and it was just like. And recently, I actually just started reading the Superwoman comic books last night, where her and Lois both get Superman powers, and then they're kind of like being a team together. And spoiler alert for a comic book that's like 5 years old now, but Lois dies very early on in this. It's like a different version of Lois Lane, but she dies, and now it's just Lana, and she's got this whole relationship with Steel, actually, which again ties into another Easter egg, because they kind of hint at that in season 2, that something might be going on between Lana and John Henry. So I just really love what they've done with Lana in this show. I think that, seeing her deal with Kyle, and I love the fact that there is no question about like her pining for Clark or anything like that. Clark is her best friend. And as someone whose best friend is a woman, I think it's great to see a healthy platonic friendship between a man and a woman on TV like that.
Yes. Right. Thank you. Yes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's no competition in that whole kind of thing. Does get really angry in season 2. Just like the teenager, she was really, really ticked when she found out, about Clark and Superman. She was ticked, just like the teenagers. But yeah, you know what? I did kind of notice that hint of a maybe thing, kind of whatever. And I was like, I wonder what that was about. So, oh, okay, interesting to know. The one thing, yes, that I wanted to say that kind of resonated with what you were saying, Perry, is and what you were saying, Jen, kind of together. The reason why that whole love triangle thing doesn't work, I think, or why they shouldn't go that route and why they don't go that route is because they've made both Lana and Lois whole round characters with
Absolutely.
their own agency, right? And the things that we were all afraid of, these would be hangers on of Superman, whether it's Lois or whether it's Lana, would be kind of like a save me kind of damsel in distress kind of thing. None of that is playing in here, and I'm very happy for that.
I just want to say too, also on that similar route, you just made me think of Martha's role in this, as because oftentimes in a lot of the other media, Martha Kent doesn't get a whole lot of stuff to do. She's there to, like, be nice to Clark when he comes by and everything. But usually Jonathan, his father, was the one to, like, give the counsel. He was, like, the town patriarch, the one everyone trusted. And I really like what and even though Martha doesn't stick around for long, she dies very early on, but I still like that idea of her continuing legacy. Like, Lana saying, like, Martha was like the champion of the town, basically. She was our town Superman, basically, she said.
Right.
And I thought that was such a cool thing. That was such a good way to utilize Martha, because the whole thing about Superman is my late co-host on my show, he used to say that the two greatest superheroes of the DC universe are Jonathan and Martha Kent, because they took this baby and who ends up growing up to become the world's greatest superhero. And the only reason he becomes the world's greatest superhero is because of Jonathan and Martha and the way they raised him.
Yeah. That's very true. Yes, I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Yeah, because he's a baby and there's no innate, whatever.
Right.
It's the way that they steered him. And you kind of also see that when he's training Jordan and kind of you see that influence in the Clark Kent Lois Lane generation and how they're steering their kids, and that's why their kids being whole and complete characters and having that other whole level there. That's why it's all great story. It's just it's all working together so well. And to me, I think it's a very, I don't want to say non-toxic, but it that's the only thing I can think. A very healthy and real family dynamic, a very healthy and real representation of people.
Yeah, and without being boring, because that's kind of the lie that a lot of people believe, that if you have a story, I mean, one of the big things that people believe killed Lois and Clark, the Superman TV show from the early 90s, is the fact that once those two characters got together on the TV show, all the drama just got sucked out of the show. And yeah, there's some truth to that, but that's not because that, you can't tell stories about a couple that's together. It's just because the writers just weren't creative enough. They weren't good enough writers to really think about how to do it.
Right.
Exactly.
And this show proves that you can have a show about a healthy couple and a healthy relationship who have a healthy family dynamic, and it can still be captivating and interesting and all that stuff. You still have drama in this show. You still have problems that they have to confront. They still butt heads, but it's not like the kind of low-hanging petty bullshit that you'd see in a lot of lesser shows.
Right.
Exactly. There's a maturity to the storytelling in this show that we don't often get to see, period, much less in a superhero show.
Yeah.
But just in general, it's a show that that doesn't take the easy way out. And just when you think they're going to go with the route of lazy storytelling, it's almost like they're aware that they're setting you up and they are going to flip it just when you get there, like Lois and Lana becoming good friends. So I appreciate that. I love when a show can keep me on my toes. I want that out of something. And so, the quality storytelling here is really, really well done. And we didn't even get into a lot of the town dynamics that's happening.
Right, exactly.
We focused a lot on sort of those interpersonal relationships, which is pretty impressive. So yeah, that they get that right, it's like everything else really falls into place.
Mm-hmm. Well, also on that interpersonal relationships, they also play with how Lois and Clark interact when they first meet in this show. They do that awesome flashback episode when they go back to when Superman first appeared in Metropolis. And,
yeah,
the typical way, which we saw in Superman the movie, which we saw in Lois and Clark, is that Lois doesn't think much of Clark Kent, right? She's kind of like, she's kind of dismissive of him. And then Superman, she's like gaga for, right? And that's it's kind of an archaic thing in this day and age. And I think the one thing that I did like about that Man of Steel the Snyder movie, is that it showed Lois being able to figure out Superman's identity before he's even Superman, right? She's tracking him down, she finds out who he is, and she confronts him about it. I thought that was a really smart way to showcase her intelligence. What this show does, it doesn't do the same thing, but it does something different, where Lois is very, very suspicious of Superman when he first appears. She's like, wait a minute, this guy's an alien and he's coming back. He's saying he's here to help us and everything. And she's on her toes right away, like her reporter's instincts, which they should be on edge when something like that happens. That makes total sense. But what I love about it is she likes Clark as a person, right? She's very interested in Clark. Like she's doing that interview on TV and she's talking about why she's suspicious of Superman. Then after they're off camera, she's like, "Oh, I've got a date with this new guy, Clark. He's, it's so nice. He's such a nice guy and all this. He's so different from a lot of the other guys in Metropolis." And I did like that she had a genuine interest in Clark and she didn't really care about Superman.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I did want to go back to, Jen, what you were saying about the town dynamic. And to me, that actually embodied some of the social issues going on, especially that whole, when Morgan Edge gets there and the whole dynamic of revitalizing a small town kind of thing. That was, in season 1, that whole storyline there, speaks to kind of what's, going on now and kind of, or what has been going on in America, with the whole small town and we're bringing the manufacturing in, but manufacturing is, we don't know what they're actually doing, kind of thing.
I think that there's this kind of points again to them being able to take a realistic situation and apply it to this superhero environment, right? A lot of times we either see small towns as dead and dying or idyllic, where everybody's friends and everybody's happy, and aren't we lucky to live in a small town where this is where the good people are.
Or it's the Twin Peaks style thing where there's something weird going on about the town.
Exactly.
Or it's super weird and outsiders are not welcome and and you better watch your back, right? So you kind of find those two dynamics. And what they've done here is they've kind of merged those two dynamics together in a lot of ways, right? They took the kids are not just like welcomed back into high school, right? They're the new kids and they get teased. Jonathan doesn't make the football team or doesn't make the starting lineup on the football team and all that type of thing, right? So they've added that amount of realism. They've added in the fact that the town needs something to really get people working and good jobs with benefits and all those kinds of great things, which a lot of small towns really do struggle with. And figuring out what is it that about our town that we can bring in. Now they happen to have this mine, right, that they can take advantage of. And that's a whole, obviously that turns into a whole thing. But figuring out who you can trust in those situations, certainly there's a lot of small towns that have been taken advantage of. So I really appreciate it again that there's this level of realism that they were able to place as a foundation and then layer it over with our superhero story that we love so much.
Absolutely. I think and one of the things I liked about it is that it does actually feel like a small town, right? I mean, I think I remember Smallville, the TV show, it kind of felt like, and sometimes you're watching like, wait, is this really a small town? Because they seem to have a lot of like, a lot of stuff that seems like it's a little like a small city than a small town.
Yeah,
And
suburbia.
yeah, it seems very much more, it
Smallville
feels like
suburbia.
exactly. It feels like a suburb. This does not feel like a small rural Kansas town. But this one, it does feel like a small town. I thought they did a really good job of handling that aspect of it. And I thought they had kind of overdone at first the whole small town, big city rivalry thing. I thought, they kind of pushed that a little bit heavy handedly with Kyle, but I think ultimately it did end up working out in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that I remember one review I saw of like the first 2 episodes complaining, saying like the headline was like Superman battles corporate America and it's as boring as it sounds. I'm like, that's not boring. That's like one of the most interesting things about the show is he's not going up against the typical supervillains. And this is the kind of stuff that Superman was actually created to fight if you go back to the original comics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he was totally like a people talk about social justice warrior and all that crap these days. Superman was the original social justice warrior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I like it a lot. Also, it brings me kind of to season 2. The same, they pull that same, it worked to me in season 1. And so I guess when Lana is running for mayor against the incumbent mayor, George Dean or whatever.
I think that was his name.
Bringing that small town vibe, especially when you're going to the big superhero plot. Overall of it is we're combining these worlds are in peril kind of thing with Bizarro. The fact that there's this, they continue the whole small town dynamic and the whole social dynamic with Lana running for mayor and all of that political stuff that's happening, which mirrors a lot of political American stuff that's kind of going on right now as well.
One of the
and
oh, sorry,
shaming.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say that, when you mentioned this combining with the superhero stuff, that also made me think of how the show does a really good job of taking this social issue that we deal with. So like Jen was talking about, the revitalization of the small town. And then you have that, corporate exploitation of these small towns and these resources. And then you turn that into a supervillain plot with, he's trying to mine this kryptonite so he can bring back, other Kryptonians who are trapped in the Phantom Zone. That was a really clever way of doing that. And then in season 2, you've got a similar idea where, you have all these people struggling and they're very susceptible to a strong magnetic personality, a cult leader. So it's very similar to what we see with like the QAnon stuff and all that. And then you bring it in is like she's merging these 2 different worlds together. They did a good job of finding those social issues and combining it with the wacky superhero stuff.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Again, that's what makes the show the rich show that it is. That's what makes it, both bingeable and I can be okay with 2 episodes, tonight kind of show. And why I wanted to stick around, to be honest. And, this is just my personal opinion because I just kind of started watching season 8 of The Flash only because I've been watching The Flash. It's not necessarily because I've got to watch The Flash,
I hear you. When you're that many seasons in.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like this show maybe had a little bit of influence on season 8, and they keep saying level up, which is corny, in the first couple of episodes. But they have a little more meat with that show. There's a little bit more richness in that show, and I think part of it is because we know that the Flash and Iris have some kids and the kids are somewhere, and then we have all this other stuff going on, and they're actually they're kind of trying to really develop these whole new characters for the fact that Cisco left, all the other characters that they were trying to kind of replace or whatever's going on with that. But it feels like maybe they felt the pressure a little bit, and maybe this is just me personally kind of looking at it and being a comparison. I don't know, but but it feels like they're like a little bit they were like a little bit pressured to kind of get a little more meat on that show. To also add to that, Superman and Lois just feels like, even though it was introduced in the Arrowverse, it is, it's been in the crossovers and things like that, and it's on the CW with all the other DC shows. It's so not one of those shows,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think, originally they had intended for it to be part of that whole universe type of thing, because they had actually originally planned to do a crossover with Batwoman, actually. But COVID restrictions meant that they had to cancel those plans.
Yep.
And you see that too, like, John Diggle from Arrow, he pops up in both season 1 and season 2.
Exactly.
But I think at some point between season 1 and season 2, when all the shakeups were happening with Warner Brothers Discovery and with the other CW shows getting canceled left and right, I think at that point they're just kind of like, you know what, maybe we should just make it its own thing. And I think it's been a good decision. I think it's worked really well.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that it has. It's worked very well for them, because I'm definitely going to keep watching as long as they keep bringing it like they're doing. Kind of with that, let's talk a little bit about overall ratings of the show, what we rated it, and kind of why we're rating it that. Perry, and those of you out there who are new to the show, of course, we are a reader-focused show, so our ratings are actually from Goodreads, even though this is a TV show that we are rating. And so when we talk about Goodreads, we are talking about their rating system, which is a 5-star rating system. 1 star means we didn't like it. 2 stars means it was okay. 3 stars means we did like it. 4 stars, we really liked it. And 5 stars, it was amazing. So, Jen, what do you think about when you're thinking about star ratings and overall, and will you watch this again? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to give it 4 stars. The reason I'm going to give it 4 stars is that it is one of those shows that I thoroughly enjoy watching. Like I've said today, I really appreciate the maturity in the storytelling and the twists and turns that they take us on. But it lost a star for me just because of the whole, it's not one that I just jump up and down for. You know what I mean? I don't find myself, chatting with people and going, "Oh my God, you have to watch it. You have to watch it. Watch it and tell me immediately." So I'm going to reserve my 5 stars for those kinds of shows, and they do exist. But I have thoroughly enjoyed my watching of Superman and Lois. So.
Perry, what do you think star rating wise and overall impression?
Can we go half stars as well on this, or just full stars?
Yes, we do all the time.
Okay, so I think I'm actually going to split it up into both season 1 and season 2. I'd give season 1 4.5 stars, and I think I'd give season 2 about 4 stars. And the reason because of that is, season 2 was great, but I did feel like they were kind of retreading some of the same plot elements, just in a different way. Like we think it's one villain, and then halfway into the season there's a twist and it's a different villain. So I thought there was some of that kind of stuff, which kind of felt like it was a little bit lazy in some ways. So that's why I'd knock it down to 4 for season 2. But season 1, definitely 4.5.
Okay, I'll give you that one. For me, I am going to do an opposite. And that's only because of the geek factor. And I'm feeling really geeky right now. I'm giving it 4 stars for the first season. And I'm giving it 4.5 stars for the second season because of the whole Bizarro world and showing Bizarro and all of that. Not necessarily for... I don't know. I don't like that whole, the cult mentality and the whole, weird belief kind of thing. I'm not a fan of that. So the whole Allie plot and the whole plot with Lois's sister Lucy, is it?
Yeah.
You know, the whole plot of that being a cult. She's really preying on the fact that Lucy is, you know, broken in some ways. That whole dynamic in general, not just with this, but in general, that whole dynamic just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So that's why not 5 stars for me. I tend to 5-star a lot of stuff, but that's why not 5-star for me, because that's a personal thing. The reason why it gets the 1/2 star for season 2 is because of Bizarro, which is Bizarro's not the villain, Allie is the villain. But it's because of the whole Bizarro and me being all geeky about that. I've said a few times on here, Perry, but even though I'm not a comic book reader, I recognize comics as canon. As soon as I see something that maybe not the casual Superman person knows, or not necessarily Superman, but the casual superhero movie watcher would pick up on, I immediately kind of want to learn a little bit more about it. So of course I started doing a little research, you know. This is a whole Bizarro world. Oh my gosh, you know, so I find this article about, you know, Bizarro and the whole Bizarro world. And I'm like, I didn't really know that. And, you know, I knew that, you know, they talk backwards and, you know, Bizarro talked backwards and he was a bit of an idiot and all that kind of stuff. But that kind of gave me a little geek out factor. So that's why the 1/2 star there. But yeah, I think I'm with both of you in that it's not 5-star, but it's really good.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you to both of you for coming on and just talking Superman and Lois with me. Perry, before we go, because you are an author, and because, you know, you have a lot of reader focused things maybe going on, tell me, do you have any new releases coming out or anything coming up that you want to talk about with our audience?
Absolutely. Well, first, again, just want to thank you for inviting me on. This is a real fun conversation. We didn't mention it also, but I just wanted to also quickly toss out, I love that they show him in the old Max Fleischer costume with the red trunks and the red and yellow and black symbol on it in the early episodes. Yes. So that was another, and the whole, like, you know, the kid says, "I like your costume." He's like, "Thanks, my mom made it for me." Just love that. Yes! Kind of like that stuff. Just, it got me, it made me stand up and cheer. So I just wanted to toss that out as one final thing to mention.
That was awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, my stuff, if you go to percivalconstantine.com, that's my hub for everything. You can find all my books there. I'm currently working on the first book, what's going to be called the Mark of Cain series. It's an urban fantasy series. It's set in the same world as my Luther Cross and Morningstar novel series. So if you're interested in any of those, you can go check those out. Again, percivalconstantine.com. Those are also all available on Kindle Unlimited if you're one of those subscribers. I got a bunch of other books out there. If you like superhero stuff, I've got the Vanguard superhero series that's 5 books long and it's complete. And I think the first book is available free on most of the ebook retailers. Also, if you like listening to discussion about superhero movies, superhero TV shows, you can listen to my podcast. Superherocinephiles.com is the website for that. Yvonne was on that one last year now. I think it's been a while. And we talked about the idea of romance in superhero stories. And so that was a fun conversation we have. You got to go look that up. That was like around episode 100, somewhere around there that we did that one. But yeah, that's all my stuff.
And we'll have links to all of Perry's stuff. We'll have links to it in the show notes for this episode. So if you didn't catch those links, we'll have links to that, including the link to that episode, Superheroes in Love. So Jen, Perry, thank you very much for coming on and talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Yvonne. This was so much fun. It's a great show, great discussion. Perry, it was great to meet you and get to nerd out with you for a bit. Well. This was awesome.
So that's all for this episode. We've got a new website at nerdyromanticspodcast.com. But don't fear, All of our episodes and their show notes are on our new website. While you're there, please consider donating to our podcast with the donate button at the top right-hand corner or the Buy Me a Coffee button on the show notes for each episode. Your donations go straight to keeping this podcast on the air and keeping all of our episodes out there for you to listen to whenever you want to. If you want to get our show notes in your inbox, please consider signing up for our Nerdy Romantics newsletter. The sign-up form is at the bottom of each page on our new website. Thank you for listening.